Welcome, everyone, to another episode of our Precision Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Gary Gustavsen, partner at Health Advances. And today we're going to keep our deep dive going in the really incredible field of digital pathology. It's a field that's been getting a lot of interest lately, not to which is probably most interesting is the big M&A event we had a couple of weeks ago with Roche picking up Path AI. So it's a very timely time for us to be digging into this. And I've got my partner, Arushi Agarwal, who also leads our precision medicine practice, to help me through this really great interview with Nathan Buchbinder, who's the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Proscia, one of the really important players in this digital pathology field. And where I thought we could start, Nathan, was to take a step back and look at the broader DP ecosystem, because I do think there's probably some newcomers to the podcast here who have maybe had a renewed look at this field and maybe don't have quite a great feel for the different ecosystem players, the different companies, how a company like Proscia fits in. So if you could kind of maybe take a start there and walk us through those different players, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to do that. And thanks for having me, Gary and Arushi. Great to talk to you and to the rest of the folks interested in this space. The digital pathology market, from an industry perspective, tends to be broken traditionally into three functional industry services providers. There's hardware companies that build the scanners. There's digital pathology platform vendors that provide what historically was called an IMS, an image management system. More recently, it's been called a digital pathology system or a digital pathology platform, and AI companies. There's certainly some blurring between the lines. There's companies that serve all three, that only serve the hardware, that only serve software, that only serve AI, and that do anything on the software side, whether it's platform or AI. For some context about Proscia, we serve the latter two buckets. We do not do hardware, but we're one of the leading providers of digital pathology solutions, be that our industry-leading, best-in-class software platform, Concentric, AI solutions, ours or third parties that we ingest into the diagnostic or research workflows through our platform, or data solutions that we lean into through the network of adopters of digital pathology and of Concentric in particular, and with whom we partner to help make data and insights from patients available to drive biopharma decision making.
Great. So you sort of alluded to it just now in your market description, but as we know, particularly with some of the more recent investment and acquisition activity in this space, the lines between those very clean buckets are getting blurred. And whether that's, again, Roche with Path AI, kind of developing this now maybe full end-to-end solution, obviously with Tempus, and Page going kind of a similar way. There's been others. From your standpoint, what are the signals we can take from all of this activity, which has been kind of, picking up more recently? And what does that kind of mean for the ecosystem in the industry as we've just described it?
Yeah, Rishi, it's a great question. It's an exciting time to be in the digital pathology space, whether you're an end user or a purchaser of digital pathology that's getting value out of the solutions offered, or on the industry side, building new technology that's changing the way that we practice pathology and better understand disease. When we take a look at the digital pathology market, the digital pathology industry, it's not surprising that we're seeing so much M&A activity and momentum in that domain. And the reason is because we're following the traditional curve that you see across markets and across industries, where you traditionally start off with very few industry players, very few companies manufacturing technology, and very little adoption of that technology. As you see early adopters pick up the technology, you see a tremendous amount of investment in the space on the promise of what's to come, on the total market size, on the impact to patient, impact to bottom line and top line. And we saw that somewhere between 2015 and 2021, 2022, there was an influx of new vendors left, right, and center. New scanner manufacturers of massive systems, tiny single slide scanners, new software manufacturers building platforms, some for research, some for diagnostics, and some on the AI side, plenty on the AI side. whether that's groups developing specific AI applications for a particular indication, doing services for biopharma, developing foundation models, really a whole plethora of different use cases and value propositions that these companies have developed. Over the last 2 or 3 years, what we've seen is that the digital pathology market has reached a point where winners and losers are starting to emerge. It's no longer just early adopters that are investing in the technology. It's beginning to be mass market in the US and in Western Europe in particular. And as that's happened, I don't think anyone should be surprised that there's been a separation between the companies that have been able to demonstrate value creation for customers and achieve that degree of scale and those that haven't. And when those companies have demonstrated scale, that's when you start to see a flurry of acquisitions, of mergers, of interesting partnerships that are more strategic in nature. And on the other side, it's also when you start to see some of the companies that haven't been able to really see that momentum begin to taper off in their activity and engagement in the space.
No, that totally makes sense. How are you all at Proscia thinking about the implications of all of this? What does that mean for your strategy, where you think you'll play, types of partnerships, anything else that you're sort of thinking about in the next few years?
At the most fundamental level, what we see is that all of this activity is a signal of where the market stands. All of this is an indicator that the market has reached a level of maturity where these kinds of big investments and acquisitions are being made, and where it's time to go out and, from our perspective, capture market and do so by creating more and more value. From the pathologist or scientist's perspective, what this means is that there's a little bit less frothiness and a little bit more maturity in the solutions that are being adopted. You can have a little bit more confidence that the companies that make it through are the ones that are going to continue to last. And you're not putting your money and your time and effort into solutions that ultimately aren't going to last the test of time. I will say that a handful of the recent acquisitions certainly are very validating about a hypothesis that we've had about this market, namely that pathology needs a shift towards data-driven medicine, that value from pathology comes from the fact that it's one of the richest biological signals out there that's remained almost entirely untapped or disconnected from the rest of the care journey on the diagnostic side and diagnostic development and drug development and pharma and the life sciences. And the progress that we've seen in the industry, the activity that we've seen, has highlighted that some of the most mature companies in this space and adjacent to this space, be that Tempus and their acquisition of Page a couple years ago, or Roche and their recent acquisition of Path AI, that they're looking and seeing the same thing, that this ties into where the rest of their business is heading, where they're seeing value creation, and they want skin in the game as well. We view that as being enormously validating of our hypothesis, and extremely encouraging about where this market is heading.
That's great. It's funny you mentioned. I was just speaking with someone the other day. We were talking about liquid biopsies and cfDNA and the fact that you're reliant on the signal showing up in a sample that's not actually the direct sample that you need, versus this is, to your point, you're looking at the thing. You have the sample in front of you and it's all there. And now it's just a matter of the tools catching up to actually get what you want out of it and get everything you want out of it. And I think that's probably, it's been interesting to see that take off in the research world. It's been interesting to see now how it's starting to take off in the clinical world with new companion diagnostics. But yeah, I mean, I think, Gary, your thesis, one of your hypotheses has always been we're at an inflection point because biopharma cares about digital pathology now. And I feel like this is just more evidence of that.
Yeah, no, I think we are completely 100% with you, Nathan. I mean, we're entering an inflection point for so many reasons, but I did like the point you brought up in terms of there is a rich amount of data being generated here right now, right? That may be yet another reason why biopharma can wake up and say, hey, beyond just supporting, biomarker and companion diagnostics of our programs, there may be some actual rich data for us to mine, similar to what we saw in the genomic revolution. So talk to us a little bit about how you see kind of these parallel paths, right? I mean, we often do see these newer biomarker paradigms kind of move forward, both in the life science research and biopharma world. and similarly, maybe lagging in the clinical world. Where are we with digital pathology? Can we learn things from how things are adopted in the biopharma world? Are we expecting things to kind of catch up on the clinical realm? What are you thinking about all of that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey, and the way that digital pathology adoption has happened, the pattern of adoption across these subsegments of biopharma, early stage discovery, clinical development, commercial, and to the diagnostic space tells a lot about what value is being created and what value is being perceived by both the life sciences and the diagnostics space. The first set of adoption that we saw for digital pathology, beyond the handful of academic medical centers that are always willing to try new things, was in biopharma. And in particular, it was in early discovery. The reason that we saw digital pathology adoption happen there first was largely because there's a willingness to invest in new technology so long as it surfaces new information, new biological signal. And pathology data is nothing but biological signal. It's probably the most direct representation, physical representation of any disease for which there's a structural or three-dimensional element to how you describe its physiology and how it affects the human body. Cancer is a great example of that, where tissue structure, tissue architecture, spatial biology, all comes into play. And you don't get a better signal than of the image of the pathology itself, of what you see on the glass slide. And so discovery stage biopharma were some of the first to adopt this technology, starting as early as the early 2000s, picking up in the 2010s, and continuing to accelerate. What we saw next was that there was concurrently the beginning adoption in the diagnostic space, following the 2017 FDA clearance for the Philips scanner, and the subsequent Leica and Hamamatsu and other scanner clearances, with other software packages layered on top. That started to lead to some adoption in diagnostic practice. But today what we see is that the cycle is kind of working back as digital pathology has seen more mainstream adoption in diagnostic practice. The teams in the life sciences companies and biopharma that are focused less on early discovery and more on how do I take something and actually bring it through regulatory and bring something to market are now looking and saying, digital pathology is actually a viable domain. Digital pathology is actually an appropriate modality for me because not only does it have this rich biological signal that gives me an indication that there's some correlation to what I'm seeing in the tissue and either response to therapy or potential outcome or disease progression or whatever the correlation might be that you're hunting for. I also now have a sense that if I build something that's dependent on digital pathology, if I build a companion diagnostic or drug that's dependent on a biomarker, I have a means of actually seeing it leveraged in practice. So that cycle, that flywheel has begun to really spin. And I don't think there's any stopping it now. That's the stage that we're at today, where we're going to see much more rapid adoption of digital pathology in the diagnostic ecosystem as a consequence of what's to come from biopharma. You can't be a practice that doesn't have access to the best and most advanced tests that are coming in the future. And that in kind is going to lead to more biopharma investment in digital pathology as one of the core platforms, one of the core approaches that they take to drug discovery, development, and delivery.
Oh, that's great. You mentioned outside of the early adopters in academic institutions, because they're always willing to adopt new things, whether or not it makes financial sense or not, it's been a little bit of a slow go, right, for the clinical adoption. And I guess my next question to you, and Arushi's heard this a million times, how much of a big deal is a CDX in this space, right? Because when we've talked to the individual institutions as they try and make the economics work for bringing on digital pathology, they say, I can't make it work without preferential reimbursement. That's what's going to get me over the hump. That's what's going to make the return on investment model speak to my administration. Once we get a CDX with preferential reimbursement, that's the unlock for me. Are you hearing that a fair amount in the community? Are we making more of a big deal than that? We've got potentially our first kind of in the fall with AZ's Trop-2 NMR, with the Avanzar study. Are we looking at that as a huge yes or no go, no go for a lot of groups, or are we maybe making a little more out of that than we should?
Um, I think I have to connect you with some of the groups that we work with on the diagnostic side, because the concerns that you were raising certainly are out there to an extent, but they've largely been addressed over the last 12 to 24 months for many of the labs that are going digital. And in fact, while we're at somewhere in the mid-teens adoption of digital pathology and diagnostic practice in the US today, when we look at the number of labs that are actively going through the adoption process right now, I would be shocked if we're not at somewhere between 30 and 40% digital pathology adoption and routine diagnostic practice in the next 2 to 3 years. Probably closer to 50% within the next 12 months after that. And so they're doing that obviously with some hope and expectation of additional testing that brings in more revenue and that justifies more of the cost of adoption. But even under the assumption that that doesn't happen, they're seeing value from efficiency gains in the individual pathologist reads, operational efficiency gains as a practice with the distribution of cases between pathologists who may not be co-located, the ability to hire and recruit talent that are located geographically in very different places, the capacity to deploy AI of a workflow nature or of a diagnostic or prognostic and predictive nature, the ability to bring in additional business, whether that's second opinion consults or support expansion to additional sites through M&A with a unification that comes through a digital-based ecosystem. There's a whole host of economic drivers that are making it very profitable for labs to adopt digital today, and it's why we've seen that growth. Mind you, a CDX that depends on digital pathology implementation in order to run it certainly holds, yet another amplifier of adoption in the U.S. market and beyond.
Right. Maybe that's the difference between 40% adoption and 80% adoption. But fair point. Fair point. No, that I think you're spot on. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that. We're actually running a project right now on the economics, building an economic tool for adoption of digital pathology, similar to the DPA tool. And as we interview more labs, it does depend on the lab you talk to, but there are plenty of labs that say, no, with all the components that we're talking about, we can make the numbers work even without preferential reimbursement. So that's great to see. Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the future is bright then. We'll take a CDX if we can, but if not, we'll continue to press on. That's great. Well, I think that's basically all the time we have and everything we wanted to cover. Anything else from you, Nathan, before we let you go?
No, I would say to your listeners, keep your eyes on this market. Things are developing very quickly, and it's very rapidly not just becoming the standard of care in diagnostic practice, but reshaping the role of pathology in the precision medicine paradigm. So thank you so much, Gary and Arushi, for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're seeing, and looking forward to continuing to engage with you guys and with the rest of this space as it evolves.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan, and Proscia at large, for joining us today, sharing your perspectives. I definitely learned something. Hope you have a great ASCO. If anyone's walking the halls, feel free to find Nathan, or maybe after ASCO. You've always been a great resource for us, and if anybody's out there looking to learn more, they should reach out. You're a great resource, great thought leader in the space. So thanks for your time, and we'll look forward for everyone else to join us for the next episode when the time comes. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.